first came to my attention about 2 days before closing arguments, when Larry Pollard, who was the person who first came up with this theory, came to my office, and he said, I'm getting ready for closing argument. All the evidence is done. And he said, I think I know what happened. You know, I'm all ears, Larry. Because I've been trying to figure this out for quite some time. And he said, you know, we have these barred owls in our neighborhood, and I've been doing some research, and you know, I noticed that the wounds on the right side of Kathleen's head, they sort of look like talons of an owl. And then I started thinking about all these barred owls in our neighborhood. And indeed, if you listen, at one point in the documentary, a number of people have pointed this out to me. In one of the episodes, you can actually hear an owl in the background. I can't remember which episode it is, but you can all go back and rewatch it now. And he said, I think that's what happened. You know, I think Kathleen went out to the front of the house after she left the pool. You know, she was putting out Christmas decorations that day, and she may have, you know, wanted to go out and finish that. And I think this owl swooped down and grabbed her scalp and you know, ripped it up, and then she went into the house and bled to death. Okay, so, and I think you want to argue that to the jury. Well, there's a problem with that. You know, number one, I've been telling the jury for 5 months that it was a fall. And I really can't go in there now and say, listen, forget what I've said. I've realized over the weekend that it was really a barred owl in the neighborhood.
You done that, would you buy a used car from it?
So I can't do that, Larry. But even if I wanted to do that, I can't argue about barred owls because there's no evidence in the record about barred owls. So I can't even do it even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. So Larry left, and he went out, and he was well-meaning, but he started talking about the owl theory before he really had his ducks in a row. And sorry. And it became a joke. You know, it really became a joke. And no one took it seriously. I mean, we had all, let's go do an owl lineup. You know, we'll gather up all the owls in that neighborhood. We'll do a lineup and we'll see. And, you know, anyway, we'll see who did it. You know. And these are the jokes that were being told. I'm not making these up.
This sounds like something I hear from Jim Bell.
Anyway, so it became a joke. But then when we got him a new trial, by that point, Larry had gotten experts. He had videos. You know, back in 2003, you may not remember this, but YouTube was not what it is now. You know, YouTube back then, if it even existed, was like, you know, pictures of babies falling over or stupid dog tricks. Now, if you go on YouTube and you type in barred owls attacking humans, and go home and do this, folks, you will find 25, 50, I don't know how many videos of barred owls attacking the heads of human beings all over the world. You know, I mean, it's amazing. But we didn't have that back in 2003. We had it by 2011 or 12. So I had to take the owl theory, which I had laughed at as well, I had scoffed at, much more seriously. And so what I've done here is I've created a little, it's not a whole PowerPoint presentation because I'm afraid of those, but it's simply a slide. And what the slide shows is a bunch of the circumstantial evidence that one could argue supports the owl theory. And, you know, prosecutors love circumstantial evidence. They talk about the links in the chain and how circumstantial evidence is the most effective kind of evidence, that, you know, and they love it. So let me just talk about the circumstantial evidence here. So, first, barred owls were living in the woods by the Petersen home. That's a fact, indisputed. Barred owls are aggressive and can be dangerous. That's a fact. All you have to do is read the Audubon Society magazine, and they actually published an article about this case and basically positing that a barred owl could very well have inflicted those initial wounds on Kathleen's scalp. Barred owls have attacked people on numerous occasions. That is a fact that can now be established because there's newspaper articles about it, there's video showing it. So we have these three facts beyond dispute. Here's some facts that are interesting that I didn't recognize the importance of back in the day. There were drops of blood on the outside walkway leading to the front door of the house, as shown in police photos. You know, you've all seen these police photos, crime scene photos, where they have the little cones with the numbers, and then they have close-ups. Well, they had a picture of the front walkway like that, and there were these little cones, and when you looked at the close-ups, there were little drops of blood. And I saw it. And so, how could I explain that? I mean, you know, we want to have, I don't know, explanations for things. And so my explanation at the time was, I made this up. I completely made this up. That Michael had put his arms underneath Kathleen, he put some towels under her head, and so he must have gotten blood on his hands. And then he went out to wait for the EMTs, and so that blood must have dropped off his hands as he walked out and walked back looking for the EMTs. That was my explanation for it. He hadn't told me that. He didn't remember what he did after he made the phone call, but I made that up in my head. There was a large smear of blood on the outside of the front door frame, again, as shown in the police photos. Again, I saw it, it registered, but I came up with my theory that that must have been Michael leaning on that door frame, waiting for the EMTs to arrive with a bloody palm. That's what made sense to me. Of course, you all know that at least two of the wounds on Kathleen Petersen's scalp, on the right side of her scalp, if you look at the autopsy drawings of the photos, are in the shape of talons, three-pronged wounds. And that, I saw that in the autopsy photos, and we all thought it was strange looking. None of us thought it showed a blowpoke attack. But Werner Spitz, who's probably, at the time, the leading forensic pathologist in the country, he wrote the book, Medical Legal Investigation of Death, which I guarantee you have in your office. And he was our expert, and he said, and he explained in his German accent, which of course was very authoritative, that, when a round head hits a flat object, you get splits, like when a pumpkin drops. And his explanation of those wounds was that it was from one impact, and it was splits, and that's what caused that. Okay, well, he's the guy, he wrote the book.
We're over it now.
Yeah, so who might argue with him?
Yeah.
So that was the explanation for that. There were tiny wounds on Kathleen's face, and none of us really knew what that was. They were almost little pinprick wounds. The prosecution at one point suggested that maybe it was Kathleen's nails or something, but it really didn't look like scratches. They were more like pinpricks. Well, you look back at it now, and they're actually sort of consistent with the tip of an owl's beak. If the owl is on her head and is sort of over her face, if the beak is pecking at her, those things are sort of consistent with that. A feather was found in dried blood, at least one, maybe two. It's hard for me to remember, and I haven't gone back to look at the evidence. In dried blood in Kathleen's hair. I saw the evidence. I read about it. I saw it. And so how do I make sense of that? Well, again, in my mind, the only way that could have happened was it must have come from some sort of a down pillow that was in the house, and the down must have gotten out, and it was stuck in her hair, and the hair got bloody, and there was the feather. And that was, again, I just made this stuff up. I had no basis for it. I was trying to figure out how to explain this to myself. A twig was found on the stairway just above where her body was. Where did that come from? Well, they had just put up the Christmas tree. And so I assumed that that twig came from the Christmas tree. There were numerous strands of Kathleen Petersen's head hair found in dried blood in her hands. Now, if somebody takes a relatively sharp object and strikes somebody in the head, you can cut hair with that. You can even cut hair with a sort of a blunt object if you hit it the right way. But these hairs were not cut. These hairs had been pulled out by the root balls. All right? I mean, literally, you could see the root balls on the hair. So how did that happen? Well, the theory was that, my theory, was that she must have been in a lot of pain, and she was just pulling on her hair, and she pulled her hair out, because I couldn't figure out any other explanation. And then the final piece of circumstantial evidence is Kathleen had no injuries that were consistent with her being beaten by a blunt object. She had no brain injury, no swelling, no subdurals, no skull fractures, no fracture of any facial bones, no fracture of any hand bones, none of that. And that struck me at the time as really odd, because I'd done a lot of these cases, and you always see that in a beating death. So I decided, well, what we'll do is we'll subpoena all the autopsies that were done in North Carolina for the previous 10 years that indicated cause of death was blunt force trauma. And let's take all those autopsies and let's see what the injuries were. You know, I had an intuitive feeling that we weren't going to find any, but I didn't know. And so we did that, and we got 252 autopsy reports, all the autopsy reports for the last 10 years in North Carolina, blunt force trauma. And my investigator, Ron Jarrett, went through and we did a chart, date, fractured skull, fractured facial bones, fractured fingers or arms, subdural hematoma, brain contusions, blah, blah. Yeah, so we had 7 or 8 kinds of injuries. And as he went through the autopsies, he filled it all out. And at the end, we had this chart. And oftentimes, there were 3 or 4 of these injuries that were present. Out of 252, there wasn't one, other than Kathleen Petersen's, that had none of those injuries. Absolutely none. So, when you put all that together, do I have a video of the owl flying down? I don't. I can't prove it, but that's not my job as a defense lawyer. My job as a defense lawyer is to say, okay, is that a plausible explanation? Does that give you a reasonable doubt about whether that could have happened? And so for me, when I put all that stuff together, it seems plausible to me. I can't tell you it happened that way. And it's a combination of the owl does it outside, she is bleeding, she stumbles in, and then I think our scenario of the fall and how she gets the bruises on her arm and the rest of the wounds on sort of the other side of her head and the back, I think that's all explained by our animation and the multiple falls. So for me, I think that's, at this point, the most persuasive theory that I've heard that explains everything. And if I had to go to trial again, I would certainly be arguing that theory as an alternative to the jury. So that's the Al theory.
All right, I'm glad we covered that. So I've got one more big question I want to ask you, but